Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful once again for the time that we have to open your word, to look at the past, and to reflect on how these events of the past and the understanding of these events affect the present time. We pray for each person as we study that your Holy Spirit can work upon our hearts, that you can bring that conviction that is so necessary for us to see our condition, and also, Lord, that your Holy Spirit can provide the power to overcome and change. We ask that as we continue to look at the distortions of truth in regards to the daily, that you can help our minds to clearly see what is truth and what is error, that we can separate the precious from the vile. And we ask, Lord, that we can do this for your glory. We pray this and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning again. And there's a number of things that I'm going to try to address today, or we're going to try to address. And I've been looking at this problem, reading lots of documents, and it's not a simple where we can just sort of, find a couple of documents and sort of come to a conclusion. So I'm gonna draw some things on the board here first, just to sort of clarify some points that, and I was trying to find a good picture of the 1850 chart, one that's really clear that you can read. This one I have here, you can kind of dealing with this bottom right-hand corner. You can sort of read it. But it's really hard to make out some of the words. It's and probably even worse if you're looking at it through a video, if you don't have really clear video, really good screen. But it's going to talk about the daily, and it talks about the length of the daily, Daniel 8:13, from BC 457 AD to 508_9, as being 965 years. So I've talked about this 965 years before. And then it talks, of course, from the time that the daily is taken away and the abomination of desolation set up. You get 538, you get these 30 years. Now, they did this weird thing where they did 508, 509. What they're trying to address here is the fullness of the year. But of course, that's not really pertinent in a sense to the daily itself, from 508 to 1843. So, it sort of is, I guess. If you want to look at the 1335, they're going to end in the spring of 1844. So I guess it does sort of apply, but it's just a little bit confusing here on the chart. And then you can see on the bottom lines from 1798/9 or _9 to 1844 is 45 years. And originally they had an 1843 there, but they changed it to 1844. And of course it is 45 years from 1799. So it kind of confuses things a little bit on what they were trying to illustrate here. So I think they weren't really sure how to address that problem on the chart, especially considering they have to change the 43 to 44. But they're probably doing some kind of consistency. Now, we're going to go to the whiteboard here.
I thought that was 46 years from 1798 to 1844.
That's what I'm saying, is they're counting from 1799. So that's what I'm saying. It confuses things.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Because what they probably should have done is 1798_9 to 1843_4. That would have made more sense. Right? You understand what I'm saying? So I'll maybe address this point here.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, I don't have my pen. Oh, here it is, right behind me. Okay, so. So they will talk about the daily being paganism, but they often talk about the daily being pagan Rome. And this Heidi Hikes uses to his advantage to help confuse you. So what we're going to do here is April 19th, or maybe I'll put April 18th, sunset, 1844. This is the end of Miller's prophecy. Now we're going to have 508, and this is the 1335. So this is when the daily is taken away. And is this pagan Rome that's taken out of the way to set up these the papacy here? Whoops, this is going to go here. Um, 1798. Right, so we have this 1260 here from 538 to 1798. The daily is taken away here. And if you're going to have the daily taken away here, what is the daily going to be?
We do say pagan Rome.
Okay, so it's going to be pagan Rome. And that's the only thing it can be in the context of the Millerites. You're not going to say the daily was taken away, that this is going to be Christ's heavenly ministry.
They were unaware of that at that time.
Yeah, they're not even addressing that idea. And they're not going to see anything in 508 that's going to give them a starting point for the 1335, unless they believe that the daily is paganism. Now, we know, if we go back to 723 BC, we have, this would be 1230 years. And you would need this other 30 years to get you your 1260. But this 30 years, even though paganism is taken out of the way, there's still these two desolating powers. We would call paganism and papalism. Papalism. Right? So you got paganism and papalism, the two desolating powers. And in both cases, their ability to persecute is removed approximately 30 years before the end of those periods. So we know that the same thing happens with papalism. Persecution doesn't stop in 1798, it stops some 25 years before that. So, but we still talk about these as periods of 1260 years. And then what they're going to have is they're going to have, well, I'll just make this 666 years. Now he's going to start in 158 BC. Now this period of 666 years is then an ordinal count. This is the first year, because this is AD and BC. If you added them together, it'd be 666. But we know that that would have to be 666 complete years. You would have to start here January 1st and here December 31st, and in order to get 666 complete years. So Miller didn't understand this at the time, but he took this number 666. And so this is the period of pagan Rome. Now, he does talk about pagan Rome being taken out of the way and pagan Rome being the daily. But that doesn't mean that he negates the fact that there is this period of time that you're also going to have for in 330, I think it's 330 BC. When's Alexander? Is it 330 BC?
Approximately then, yeah.
Yeah, so this is going to be Rome. This is going to be Greece. And then you're going to have Persia begin back here in 539. But you're also going to have 457 BC when the 2300 days begins. But this whole period here is going to be Persian. And then you're going to have Babylonian. And Babylonian, in their thinking, is going to begin in 677 when Manasseh is carried captive to Babylon by Esarhaddon, who's the king of Assyria. And so you're going to have Babylon here. But you're also going to have Assyria. And they're going to look at this whole thing as paganism, right? But they're also going to see this all as the daily. So they're not just seeing the daily as pagan Rome, even though the daily that is taken away is pagan Rome. Because it's paganism, the daily is paganism, but pagan Rome is the power that has to be taken out of the way. And so they can speak of pagan Rome as being the daily, but that doesn't exclude that these are also the daily, because this is paganism. This is the daily. It's the abomination, or the daily transgression contrasted to the abomination of transgression, right? So you've got these two desolating powers, paganism and papalism, and Heidi Hikes is going to try to confuse us about some of this. Now, if we go back to 457, then that's where we get this 965 years, right? So that was what is referred to on the 1850 chart. So you can see if they're going to call this the daily, they can't be thinking that this is just the daily. They have to look at all of this. But the reason why they're starting in 457 is because in Daniel chapter 8, the question is being asked in regard to this persecution that's already begun, but it's the 2300 days or years. And so they're just going to count from 457 how much is remaining. So this is about the remaining part from 457 BC. It's going to be 965 years. So in trying to explain this, at different times, they're going to use different expressions because they're focused on different things. But that doesn't negate this idea that this is the daily, or that this here is also the daily, things that precede 457. Because otherwise, the question of how long wouldn't make any sense. Now, hopefully that helps, that illustration helps a bit. Now we're going to continue reading Heidi Hikes. As much as I dislike it, I find that he gives us the best context to sort of unpackage this. But by looking at his arguments, we can see where they're faulty, and we can then address each of these different points that they try to make. So he puts together these points quite well, better than other people. But he also obscures what he's doing extremely well. Now, we're going to go back to here. So this is Heidi Hikes' book on the daily. So he's talking here about this passage in early writings and what Ellen White he believes is addressing. So he believes that she's addressing three errors. And that would be daily time setting and the idea that the saints are to go to Old Jerusalem. So he says 3 distinct but related items were emphasized in successive and contingent time attest statements within the 4 paragraphs. So that is, he's going to attach all of these to time, to time setting. These 3 consecutive points were commendation of Fitch's 1843 chart with God's hand hiding a mistake in some of the figures. The daily, the word sacrifice applied, and the time being a test, and agitation by some that the saints were yet to go to Old Jerusalem. So the first in her series of points came in the paragraph pertaining to the 1843 chart. The Lord showed me that the 1843 chart was directed by his hand, that no part of it should be altered, and that the figures were as he wanted them. That his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures so that none could see them until his hand was removed. The constant time setting, which characterized certain nominal Adventists, involved denial of the verity of the former movement and the validity of its time argument. So one of the things that Hykes is good at doing is he's good at presenting facts, real facts, and placing them into his premise while really hiding the weakness of his premise. So we know that there was constant time setting, characterized by both nominal, what they call nominal Adventists, this would be First-day Adventists, and also did exist to some degree within the movement or the group that we would characterize as the little flock. That is, people who were accepting the 7th month movement, accepting the midnight cry, and accepting that Christ had moved from the holy to the most holy place. There would still be some elements of time setting there. Because at this point, they're just looking at this delay and still thinking that maybe there's some way in which they can determine how long that delay is going to be. Now, James White, in regard to this, wrote, since the 2300 days ended in 1844, quite a number of times have been set by different individuals for their termination. In doing this, they have removed the landmarks and have thrown darkness and doubt over the whole Advent movement. So by removing the landmarks, that is, they're going to take these dates that had been established to start the 2300 days, 7 times, and the 1335, these different time prophecies, and they're going to move them to some other event. And of course, once you start doing that, you're going to have this problem of, well, why was our movement even true in the first place? Have we seen this removal of landmarks in this movement?
Oh yeah.
Right. And which makes no sense. Either the movement is of God and it was directed by God, or it was not. And this is the problem that you have here in Millerite history. You have this movement, but you're having people who say, well, we were wrong. So we're gonna set some new times. So in a sense, you're starting a new movement every time you're doing that. You're rejecting the light and the leadership of that movement, and you're starting some new movement. And of course, this is going to throw darkness and doubt over the whole Advent movement, just as it has done under this whole movement of FFA. And so we have this problem here where there is darkness and doubt in what has happened, and we saw that many people have just basically abandoned the whole movement, and some are still hanging on to the movement, but other sorts of errors are being introduced to try to, in their minds, reconcile what has happened, when we've already really, I believe, had a good explanation of what July 18th was about and how that was directed by God. But some people are looking at dates in the future or trying to determine how we can apply these things into the future in ways that we don't do. We still have the dates that God has given us and the extra dates that help affirm those things, but we're not expecting that we can predict some event in the future. Okay, so he asked the question, why did some even begin to set new dates for Christ's second advent? He says, it was because of their failure to accept their mistake in their definition of the sanctuary. Now, this is partially true, I would guess. That is, they still wanted the sanctuary to be the earth. But I don't think it's the whole answer to that. What would be the answer to this? Why would some people begin to set new dates for Christ's second advent? What would be a more likely reason other than just their failure to accept their mistake in the definition of the sanctuary? What is there about human nature that he's not really recognizing here?
We really don't like loose ends, but they're denying the validity of the previous studies in order to continue time setting.
Okay.
So they throw off their foundation.
Yeah, I think it's actually much different than that. I would think that it's just you have fanatical individuals who see this as an opportunity to be heard. That is, there are people who they were fanatical to begin with, involved in the Advent movement. They weren't sensible converted Christians, they're unconverted. And they're not looking at everything involved. They're not looking at how all these things are connected. They're not careful, they're rash. And we can see that, and now that they're unwilling to admit mistakes, I don't think it's so much even in their definition of the sanctuary. I think it's the failure to admit mistakes at all, and all kinds of mistakes that they continue to make. Errors, such as Sister Minor when she's unwilling to admit her error regarding Dr. Gorgas. So people continue to justify the mistakes that they're making.
I had a pastor characterize, just say how hard it is to be an Adventist minister, because Adventists are so independent-minded just to start with. We're all radicals by nature, just because we will accept the Sabbath and reject the emphasis on Sunday.
Yeah.
And so he said we're discordant elements from the get-go.
Yeah, well, I would say part of it as well. So I don't think necessarily being an individualist is a bad thing or makes it difficult to be a pastor. But I would say the way that our evangelistic series have been done and the way that we attract people is we use the type of bait you use will affect what kind of fish you catch. And we tend to use a lot of sensationalism. That is, if I had gone to an evangelistic series to become an Adventist, I wouldn't have. That would not have attracted me to Adventism. I'd simply studied my way into Adventism on my own, not too impressed with Adventists or the way that they present Adventism. But the thing is, there's this element of human nature here, the unwillingness to admit mistakes. That is, in order to receive new light, there's a certain characteristic that we have to have. And that is, one is we have to be teachable. We have to be able to admit mistakes. But we also have to be anchored in the past. That is, we need to move, for the most part, slowly and sensibly. We can't be caught up in excitement. And people are caught up in excitement. Many of the people who became Millerites were caught up in the excitement. And they continued to propagate this type of excitement. So it wasn't so much that they had this intellectual problem regarding the sanctuary. It was just that many people were seeking followers, and wanting to have the same excitement or experience that they had had before. So after the great disappointment, when Christ did not come as expected to cleanse the earth, the determined examination of the scriptures brought the more accurate understanding of the sanctuary in Daniel 8:14, or that the sanctuary in Daniel 8:14 was the heavenly sanctuary, and that Jesus had just entered the second apartment to begin the antitypical Day of Atonement. Fortunately, some accepted the light of instruction. With that unmistakable light, the searching faithful ones in the Advent movement, if they had not already done so, accepted the glorious ministry of Christ. Now, he's being really quite sly here, because he's the type of language that he's using as he's characterizing the different aspects of Adventism is meant to mislead you. And now he's going to talk about the glorious ministry of Christ. Now, why is he using this term, glorious ministry of Christ? Why is he choosing that term? Because he's going to talk here in the context of the daily. So why is he going to talk about the glorious ministry of Christ? And then he's going to say, unfortunately, others rejected the same light on the sanctuary. Is he now going to tie the ministry of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary with the daily and show that those that rejected the light of the glorious ministry of Christ, that this is also the basis for rejecting the new view of the daily? He's going to tie them together subtly in the language that he uses and the way he juxtaposes these statements together. Does that make sense of what he's doing? Can you see what he's doing?
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. So he's very careful. He's very clever on how he puts together this argument, how he sews together these different pieces. And he begins to bias your mind in the pioneer view of the daily, with the types of language that he uses, both for promoting the ministry of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary view of the daily, and in marring the pioneer view of the daily. It is no wonder Ellen White was distressed by the divisions and distractions that manifested soon after the sanctuary and ministry of Christ light was revealed. So again, he's going to talk about the sanctuary and the ministry of Christ light, because he's setting you up to accept that it's the ministry of Christ that is the daily in the heavenly sanctuary. Instead of proclaiming the third angel's message, much time and energy was expended by both sides in propounding or protesting against different unsustainable times of Christ's near return or new other views that would derail or delay the progress of the movement. So he has now chosen what these other views are for us. We don't know particularly what Ellen White is referring to. And definitely because this is other views of the daily. Other views have come in and darkness and confusion has followed. He's chosen what these other views are, and that they're connected to time setting, though we have no idea that that's what she's talking about, that these other views have something to do with time setting. They may, in part, but she's not saying that. Then about 1849, a new argument was introduced and a new basis for the 2300-year calculation was projected by nominal Adventists. So one is, Ellen White is not particularly that concerned about nominal Adventists in this context, though she obviously is addressing them to some degree, because we have within the movement itself, within the little flock, views that are happening. They revived and supplied the word sacrifice in relation to the daily, contending that this biblical pairing of words meant Jewish sacrifices and setting new times on this new basis. Now, I have no idea whether this is what Ellen White is referring to, but he is picking this for us, that when they talk about the word sacrifice being added, he's going to pick and choose some statements by some writers in that time period to try to say that this is what Ellen White is talking about. So he's going to say one writer stated his ideas thus. In the phrase daily sacrifice, the word sacrifice is italicized to indicate that it is to be supplied by the translator. The qualifying term, which is understood as included within itself, so that the word sacrifice is correctly supplied. It is then the continual Jewish sacrificial observances, which were terminated by Rome, symbolized by the little horn, at the destruction of Jerusalem. In other words, how long will be the fulfilling of the vision which is presented the termination of the Jewish service and transgression of Rome to accomplish the trampling down of the sanctuary of his holy people. Now, this is taken from the Advent Herald. The Advent Herald is Samuel Snow's publication, I believe. I'm wrong about that. I need to look this up. It may not be Snow's. But anyway, in the context here, we have this statement, and maybe we should look at this statement in its context. But if you take that the daily is taken away in 70 AD, how long would be the daily? How would the 2300 days connect to that question?
Well, then you couldn't start the 2300 days until Christ's ministry was usurped in heaven, and it would push the end point of the 2300 days a couple hundred years up here yet. So it made your 1844 and Advent irrelevant.
Right. So if this was in connection with time setting in 1850, would that make sense that this has something to do with time setting?
No, I don't think so. But
Yeah,
it sure gives fuel to our enemies.
Okay, so I ended up here. I need to go share. Not sure what's happening here. Let's stop the share here. I have trouble with how this is showing what we're looking at. It's not letting me. Okay. It's not letting me choose the individual. No. It's just showing my screen all the time, which I don't want it to do. Anybody know what I can do to fix this problem?
Go to the White Estate website and use that.
No, but that's not, it doesn't have it on the latest. Yeah, okay, I guess I could go there. But that's not what, I don't want to share my screen. I want to share what I'm choosing to share. And it just never did this before. It just gives me the choice of these to share.
Ain't technology wonderful?
Yep. Okay, well, I'm gonna.
Works.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's something that changed.
Devil's trying to disrupt.
Yeah, okay, it's working now. I just have to restart it. Okay, so I want to go here. So in this article, if you're going to take the position that accomplish the trampling down of the sanctuary of the holy people is going to happen in connection with 70 AD. I mean, you're throwing away all kinds of things. And and you would have no basis for this being the sanctuary. Now, or for the basis for the 2300 days. Now it talks here about the place of the sanctuary. This is the same article. It must consequently, we think, have reference to the desolation of the temple, which was cast down by the Romans when they took away the continual burnt offerings, the casting down of the truth to the ground and its persecuting Christianity, as well as destroying the Jewish worship. So I don't see how you could connect this with time setting at all. This would be just basically a rejection of the times that we have, but it wouldn't be putting the daily in connection with some other date. Right? So the taking away of the daily here, if it's 70 AD, isn't going to give you a time setting in 1850. But I haven't read this article yet. So I'm just going to take this here. I'm just going to search this. I might not get anything. I was reading too many things. I should have looked this up. But okay, so I can find this article. Well, this is kind of interesting. So when I search this, I get this. This is the only thing that shows up. It's from AdventistDigitalLibrary.org, and it's an article by Froome. And so Froome is going to be referencing this quote. Now, there was this accusation made that Heidi Heich's book was basically just the work of Froome. And I'm just going to see where this statement shows up. Yeah, so here it is. He's going to quote these quotes from the Advent Herald. And so this might be a good indication. If you look at Heidi Heich's arguments, they appear to be pretty much he's just quoting Froome. Huh. Anybody find that interesting?
Well, I think what it is a restatement that Hikes wanted or was led to support Froome. And quite honestly, given Froome's history, this would have given a stronger support to what Hikes was doing in some people's minds.
Yeah. Because basically, he's just taking Froome's arguments and just restating them.
Right.
Even using the sources that he has given. So it's kind of interesting. Okay. I'm not going to read all of this here. But anyway, that's the only, other than some ads, that's the only thing I find. So I'm going to have to look up that that document that Hikes is quoting from, or that Froome is quoting from, that Hikes is quoting. But anyway, the point is he's trying to use this idea that there are some people who are saying that the word sacrifice is correct, and that Ellen White is referring to these people and what they're teaching. But they couldn't be teaching time setting if they're taking this position. At least time setting that Ellen White would be concerned about, that she's going to address, specifically the time setting that's happening in 1850. Correct? we would have to say that there's no way that you could use that argument
Right.
there. Okay.
So, yes.
Now, there's going to be this other one, quote, and again, it's going to be a little bit deceptive in how it's presented. Okay, it says here, Mr. Miller, perceiving the prophecy referred to the government of Rome, the fourth kingdom, supposed the daily sacrifice to be paganism, and AD 508 to be the point where it was taken away, and believing the abomination of desolation of the papacy, he deemed the decree of Justinian to be the point where it was set up. But we are led to differ from Mr. Miller in regard to the meaning of the daily and from other writers referred to in regard to its application. That the Jewish sacrifices are alluded to by the term daily, there can be no doubt. The term is borrowed from the sacerdotal offerings of the Jewish worship. Well, this is somebody who's unconnected with the Millerite movement. And he has this, he may be in some way in the past connected, but he's not connected with what Ellen White is talking about. This is from a book written in 1854. Ellen White's writing in 1850. And this is a book, The Lord Soon to Come, it's called. But here, we're not seeing something that Ellen White would be addressing. Right? And again, we see that the context in which she's presenting this is and this guy was terminating these in 1854, thus time setting and making time a test on the basis of inserting sacrifice into the text. So that's what this guy was doing. But Ellen White's not going to be writing about that in 1850, right? So in trying to take this person who's not connected with what Ellen White is doing, I don't think that she could be referring to this. And that is the word sacrifice being added to the text is actually not what she talks about in her first vision. It's something that's added by James White in the Present Truth article. So initially, she doesn't say anything about being united upon the correct view of the daily had anything to do with the word sacrifice being added to the text. And we can see that she's talking about the 1850 chart that they're going to be making, that is going to be based upon the truths on the 1843 chart. So they're not seeing that at all. But you can see how by piecing this together, you have this picking and choosing of certain things. And you can see how disparate these choices are. Somebody from 1854 and somebody from 1849, which is a Millerite, but basically just denying the truth of the daily, but not really attaching that to time setting that we know of. And definitely in the way that they did it, it wouldn't work for time setting. So this guy is doing something quite different than the other one. Now, Ellen White's correct. Different types of views have come in, and darkness and confusion have resulted. But what is her main focus then in why she's mentioning the daily? Is she trying to attack these different groups? Is that the purpose?
No, it's not the purpose.
Right. So yeah, and it's not the purpose, but he's making that the purpose, that she's addressing these different errors. And in some ways, it's understandable when you see them in early writings out of the context of the vision, because you don't have that context to know that it's about the upcoming chart. But Ellen White would have taken those in 1882, and even earlier when they published it in even in the Present Truth. It wasn't to give the whole reason for her vision. It was just some things chosen from some of her visions that were put into the Present Truth. Eventually ended up in Experience and Views, and then finally in early writings. And in early writings, she's going to add that other paragraph regarding time setting that was happening in 1851. Now, he says here, Joseph Bates was affected by the time-setting emphasis of the period, although holding tenaciously to the integrity of 457 BC. Now, what you're going to see with Joseph Bates is he took something that I don't think was necessarily irrational thinking or any kind of fanatical thinking. He just saw simply that there could be 7 years from October 22nd, 1844, to the fall of 1851, right? So we know that this idea that Jesus was going to be coming soon, the idea that it's going to be 7 years, would that have been fanaticism or go contrary to anything that Ellen White had been shown in vision up until that time? That is, would you have said that Joseph Bates, by believing that there might be 7 years from the great disappointment to the final end of the Day of Atonement, was unreasonable?
I wouldn't say that he was unreasonable.
Yeah. Is he rejecting the light of the midnight cry?
Absolutely not.
No. So there would be nothing wrong with that thinking. Now, maybe it would be speculative, but they don't have any message saying that we're not going to be able to predict a time after 1844 that preserves our understanding of the midnight cry. That would be consistent with their understanding of the midnight cry. Now, he published this in 1850 in an explanation of the typical and antitypical sanctuary. Loughborough identified in print the originators of this discord. So I don't know. We really need to look at some of these things and what's being said, because the fact that he sort of spins things a little bit, I don't know if his 7 years would have even been a cause of discord. I think it would have probably been seen as a good explanation or a possibility that Jesus could come back 7 years after 1844. Now, he says Loughborough here identified in print the originators of this discord. So he says here, the confusion that came in after the termination of the 2300 days was the first among those who persisted in setting times for the Lord to come. They claimed that the daily sacrifice meant the Jewish daily offerings. That certainly made confusion in what were the clear views before. So Loughborough makes a statement in the Review and Herald, April 4th, 1907. So we can see at the time that the new view of the daily is coming about, there's already people addressing that who are on the correct side of the truth of the view of the daily. That is, Loughborough is not a proponent of the new view. But they're still both looking at this statement in early writings and seeing that the darkness and the confusion was based upon people addressing that they're adding the word sacrifice. Now, is Loughborough attaching this so there are people setting times for the Lord to come, right? But is he attaching this, or can he attach this to the statement that Ellen White is making regarding the daily and time setting? Can we say no, we can't. So there's a reading into these statements that has to be done. Now, were there people who were trying to reinterpret the daily? Yes. Were they also time setting? Yes. Is Ellen White then connecting the adding of the word sacrifice to time setting? Is that all she is talking about with the correct view of the daily that the pioneers were united upon? That would be reading into Ellen White's writings something she's not saying. And Loughborough in 1907 is definitely bought into this idea. So this does create confusion. But remember, Ellen White in the original part of the vision doesn't mention anything about the word sacrifice being added by man's wisdom. That's an addition that's put into the present truth, but not in the original writing of the article. that we have. So we have the whole account of the vision. In that account, that's not mentioned in regard to the daily. So once again, they're looking at these statements in this certain context. Thus, the basis of the confusion mentioned by Mrs. White was publicly recognized, and the reason for her reproof made obvious. Thus, also the Jewish sacrifice perspective and the confusion from time setting resulting from it was the focus of her second point in the record of her vision and early writings. So he's now created this framework so that when we read this, we're going to read it a certain way. Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text, and that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment out of pride. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily. But since 1844, in the confusion, other views have been embraced, and darkness and confusion has followed. So one of the things they're not really able to show is how the new view of the daily, or these other views of the daily, are directly connected to time setting. So they're not giving us any idea of where the daily is being moved to, other than we have one that says it's being moved to 70 AD. Well, if you're going to move it to 70 AD, you're definitely not going to get the dates from the 1335, for instance, that are going to end in 1854. So there's lots of pieces missing here. And so what Hikes has done and what Froome has done is they've picked up some pieces and they've put them together to create a picture, but have ignored the initial context of Ellen White's vision. And we've all bought into it. I mean, I personally had, for a lot of years, taken that there was some connection between time setting and the daily. Now, Jeff is the first one who pointed out that we had other sources for this early writing statement that appeared to be presenting this in a different way. Now, it says here, the Lord showed me that time had not been a test since 1844, and that time will never again be a test. In all subsequent printings, this last sentence is run in as a concluding sentence of the paragraph. Now, is that true that it's a concluding sentence of the paragraph? Is that how you would look at it in early writings?
No.
No. Now, it's put into the same paragraph, but one thing you can see in early writings is that these aren't regular paragraphs in the sense of each paragraph is just representing a different topic. These are just collections of statements from visions, and they're put into paragraphs rather than just having them run on, or they're not broken into small little sections. I don't think that you could say it's a concluding sentence to what has gone before. Now, especially when you look at it how it is here, he's presenting it as it is in the present truth. The Lord showed me that time had not been a test since 1844 as a separate paragraph. But there would be no way that you could say, because in early writings, it's now part of that paragraph and thus it's a concluding sentence. That wouldn't follow. But he's trying to draw it as a conclusion, and that wouldn't be the case. Now he says, Mrs. White's third point was made in a paragraph 4 of early writings passage under investigation. So he recognizes that paragraph 3 was from a different vision. And it pertained to the agitation beginning in 1849 regarding the final return of Jews to Old Jerusalem in 1850, which interpretation was likewise seeking entrance among our pioneers. One of the chief contrasts between Old and New World Advent awakenings was the freedom in America from the return of the Jews fallacy courted by overseas Adventists. That is, this idea, what we would call, which comes from dispensationalism. And this is a contrast. So in the old world, he's talking about Europe. There was a great emphasis upon the Jews returning to Jerusalem as a fulfillment of prophecy. That is, dispensationalism had taken hold first in Europe before it actually got a footing in America. And it's probably be the Schofield Bible that really helped establish it in America. But in the New World, they understood that the promises made to ancient Israel were addressed to spiritual Israel in the New Testament, so that we weren't looking for the Jews to return to the promised land as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. The 43 and 7th month movements in America were both free from its blight, but after the disappointment in an extremist sector, a Jerusalem enterprise was projected, which was fostered by Mrs. C.S. Minor and involved a man in Jerusalem named Masulam. I haven't run into that name yet, other places, but probably somebody that she ran into, so that we probably could find that out. But basically, they believe that for Jesus to come back, that's what Mrs. Minor, Sister Minor believed, is that the Jews needed to return to Old Jerusalem and that the Adventists needed to go there. So we've already looked into that already. Now he's going to go here that Hiram Edson temporarily espoused the general back to Jerusalem idea, writing an 8-page tract in 1850 on that viewpoint. His published words, in part, that there will be a literal gathering or return of the Jews to the literal land of Israel, the land of Palestine, before the coming of the Lord, is most clearly taught in the Old and New Testament. The Jews are to be in the land of their fathers, the land of Israel, and in Jerusalem in the time of the battle of the great day of God Almighty. So we can see that Hiram Edson, who's going to later write the Times of the Gentiles article in 1856. He's going to have that series of articles, 7 articles, on the 7 times, being the times of the Gentiles, starting in 723 BC. He is for a time caught up in this. Would there be a connection between his understanding of the times of the Gentiles and this view here about the literal Jews returning to Jerusalem? I know that's kind of maybe a new thought for people, but what would be the connection? Why would he take this view that seems so contrary to Millerite understanding of things? And this is just for a brief time that he held this view.
I don't think Edson refers to the returning to Jerusalem in any of his articles on the glorious land from which we get to 2520.
Right. So why does he have this view here that's being expressed regarding this exposition of the scripture and prophecy showing the final return of the Jews in 1850? I'm going to try to find this paper. But what do you think would be the reason? I mean, I'm asking you to kind of guess.
Well, I think Hikes is trying to co-opt Hiram Edson in order to support his premise.
Okay, yeah, well, we can agree with that. But there's a reason I can think why he would take this position. And anybody can think why. What is it about you're going to see this argument show up. So why do we think he takes this position? Why would an Adventist take this position? How would this solve? What problem would he be trying to solve? Is the question. Any ideas?
I don't know, other than just trying to make the pioneers look like they were on his side, supporting his premise.
Okay, no, that's not the question I'm asking. I'm asking why Hiram Edson is taking this. Why would Hiram Edson take this view? What problem would Hiram Edson be trying to solve without
this be-
reading this whole article? What's that, Stephen?
Would this be like the joining of the two sticks?
Yeah, I would think that it somehow relates to the joining of the two sticks. That is, even though in the Times of the Gentiles article, he's not taking this position, I would think that what he's trying to do in this, because he's going to come to the understanding of the Times of the Gentiles. So now he's going to be struggling with this one point. And this point has to do with the prophecies regarding what's going to happen to the, as in the joining of the two sticks or the gathering. So in 1844, Christ didn't return. Now Hiram Edson begins to study, and he starts to study this point and idea. It's going to lead to his paper in 1856. Even though he's going to abandon the literal Jews idea, he first explores this idea. Does that make sense that that's what he would be doing? And I haven't read his paper, so I need to read some of these things. I need to find them and sort of see what his arguments are. But just here, Heidi Hikes is taking this statement and throwing some mud into the situation. That is, we don't know specifically what Hiram Edson is doing, but we know that there is these people who are going to return to Old Jerusalem. And Sister Minor is one of them. Whether Hiram Edson is affected by Sister Minor, I have no idea. So when we look at this statement here, then I was pointed to some who are in the great error that the saints are yet to go to Old Jerusalem, etc., before the Lord comes. Such a view is calculated to take the mind from the interest of the present work. So we looked at this statement, and this is about, in the original context of the vision, is that the means are going to be withheld from, it says here, other uses, but she says the means are going to be held from making the truth plain upon tables, right? So the issue here in this vision is if the means are withheld, like people going to Old Jerusalem, then we won't be able to get out this chart. Now, is he trying to connect this then to time setting? Heidi Hikes.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's trying to connect it to time setting, though he has no way to do so, but he's just inferring it. So he says, as history certainly reveals, the period from 1844 to 1850 was one of marked confusion among Advent believers who passed through the Great Disappointment. Time setting by nominal Adventists beset the little Sabbatarian group on one hand, with extremists on the other, and they struggled against this dual pressure. Such conditions were the background and setting of the subsequent notable vision of September 23rd, 1850, recorded in early writings, which we now know as October 23rd, 1850. Obviously then, on the individual and collective basis of those four related paragraphs, and we know that they're not really related because three are, unless you take the June 21st, 1851 statement in early writings as connected. Mrs. White was meeting contemporary developments in time setting and Saints to Jerusalem agitations. Over and over again, the central issue without question was the issue of time and the setting of new dates, hence the need for the council. The overriding concern of the post-1844 movement was the damaging efforts of some to change the historical dates related to the 2300-year prophecy. The paramount issue to be defended was the true dating of the great 2300 period. So one thing we can see is that Ellen White is really not addressing what he says she's addressing. In that vision of October 23rd, she's addressing the making of a new chart and the truths to be on that chart. these statements regarding these errors are to show that these errors aren't going to end up on the new chart, that we're not going to follow those errors, and that it needs to be reflected in the new chart, and that the new chart will address that by having the truth plain upon tables. But to argue that the word daily, or the correct view of the daily that the pioneers were united on, was simply that the word sacrifice was added by man's wisdom. If we are going to take this as 508 is the taking away of the daily, is Ellen White then supporting in that statement that the 508 is the taking away of the daily, even if you attached it to time setting?
I don't see it.
Because if Ellen White is saying that the pioneer had the correct view of the daily, and she's addressing time setting, as they say, you would then have to say Ellen White is supporting 508 for the start of the 1335. And that if you try to move that anchor, then you've rejected the pioneer view of the daily. Now, they will try to argue that the pioneer view of the daily being paganism is not what Ellen White is talking about. But they don't explain how just saying that the word sacrifice is added by man's wisdom is the only aspect of the daily that the pioneers had a correct view upon. How that in any way could argue against any time setting. Because would there be time setting that still accepts that the word sacrifice is added by man's wisdom? Would all time setting in Ellen White's day be connected with a changing of the definition of the daily being paganism?
Interesting premise, and probably yes.
Yeah, so we know that there's all different types of views about time setting. And I don't think that you could just single out that the only issue of time setting has to do with somebody adding the word sacrifice to the word daily in Daniel chapter 8 or 11:31 or 12:11, right? So there has to be something else going on. But the way that this is painted, we are given some selected facts, and these things we need to delve into. So we're going to delve into these a little bit deeper. But we can say that there's no direct connection between what Ellen White's saying about the correct view of the daily and the time setting statement. That would be clear, even if there were people who were using the daily to do time setting. Ellen White's not saying that the darkness and confusion is the result of time setting. The darkness and confusion has to do with the establishment of the message that led to October 22nd, 1844. So they're placing these things together and confusing the issue. Now, we're going to have this, we're moving quite slowly here, and you can see how that we're going to have to go back and look at these things in much more detail than we are here even. So when the Present Truth, that November 1850 issue happened, they also began the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald in that month, right? So they're going to have a new periodical. They changed the name, and they started a new count. So in that inaugural issue, Bates wrote thus concerning the question of the prophetic 2300-year time and time setting. So he's going to say for 6 consecutive years, from the fall of 1844 to the spring of the fall of 1850, most of these leading members have been aiding and assisting each other in changing the chronology, the world's history, to prove that they were in the true position. What have they gained? So what have people been doing since October 22nd, 1844 in connection with time setting? What are they trying to do? They're going to come up with new chronological schemes. That is, they're going to say, we were wrong about this date. Now, was there room for that in the 1840s to say, well, maybe we were wrong about the start dates of some of these prophetic periods from a chronological point of view? Was Miller always certain about the chronology that we had been given?
Not really.
No. So they knew that maybe they could be off from the chronology. Maybe there was something wrong with the chronology. Now, we know that when they came to October 22nd, 1844, however, that what they had seen is that the movement had been led by God. In order to come up with new dates, you would have to take the position that God had not been leading the movement, that the movement was in error. So to come up with new dates, you would have to say, we made a mistake in our calculations. And as they had passed through October 22nd, 1844, they could see that in order for this movement to have any meaning, they had to be correct in their calculations. Because if they undid that, there would be no basis to just simply create new calculations. Does that make sense?
But Miller himself stayed pretty flexible even after the disappointment. He said, well, it could still happen in a couple of years.
Yeah, but if you did that, you would have to deny the seventh month movement. You would have to say that God did not lead in predicting October 22nd, 1844. So yeah, so Miller definitely took that position. Did he accept that the seventh month movement was correct, or did he assert eventually that it was an error? We're going to have to look at what Miller actually said about it later on. So he admitted it was an error. In his view, it was an error.
Wasn't it Himes that said that the 7th-month movement produced fanaticism 7 feet deep?
I don't know. I've never heard that statement.
Oh,
But Ellen White says that the seventh month movement removed fanaticism. So she says it actually disappeared as frost to the morning, or as frost to the morning sun, or something like that. Right? So that would be in contradiction of what Ellen White says about the seventh month movement. So prior to the seventh month movement, there was lots of fanaticism in the first part of the Tarian time, but there wasn't after. And it was basically, Ellen White says, free of fanaticism for the most part. So I'm not sure why Himes would say that. After October 22nd, 1844, you do have fanaticism rise again. Right?
Yeah,
This is what James
when-
and Ellen White were addressing. But the seventh month movement itself does not have fanaticism attached to it.
Yeah, Himes was writing later.
Yeah. But the seventh month movement was correct. So however you want to look at this situation, in order to come up with new dates, it would be a denial of the Lord's leading, correct?
Right.
Unless you did something like what Bates was doing, just saying maybe it's 7 years after. He's accepting all of the dates. That wouldn't be a denial of the Lord's leading. So you couldn't equate Bates' time setting as such, the saying that it may be in the fall of 1851, with the fanaticism of the removal of dates and the removal of landmarks and waymarks and the setting up of new dates. These would be different. So what Ellen White sees, and what we should see, is that the people who are changing the chronology, who are those people in our time? Who are the people denying that the Lord led us in July 18th prediction? Are there people coming up with new dates? And are there people just denying the dates altogether?
I think the answer there is yes and yes.
And I wouldn't say that we've taken the middle ground. I would say that what we've taken is that the Lord has led us, and that all the dates that have been given us are sound, even the future dates. So we're going to say that December 25th, 2021 is directed by the hand of the Lord and should not be altered. It's not a mistake in that sense. What we could say is that the idea that it was going to be the Sunday law, or that we could predict what event it was, I would think would be a mistake. Now, I always took the position, I would mark the Sunday law there as the point from when the Sunday law could first be introduced. That is, if Nashville had been hit by a nuclear attack on July 18th. I took the position that this period of 777 days marked a period in which a certain types of events have to happen, which would not be the Sunday law, because you couldn't have the Sunday law until after December 25th, 2021, because you couldn't predict the Sunday law, at least, with our line. That is, our line wasn't dealing with prediction of the Sunday law, it was dealing with something else, and mostly internal. Now, as time passed, we could even see this more clearly, that we still have other witnesses for December 25th, 2021, that this is part of the line. Now, there were some who said, you have to renounce December 25th, 2021. This is what Larry Lesher said. This is what Bronwyn said, that even just suggesting that any date is in the future is time saving. Noel and his wife, they also said this, as well as Guy, right? So they said you can't put a date into the future. Now, of course, they're eventually going to reject all the dates in the past as well. But we can see that one thing that we can't do, just like the Millerites couldn't do, they couldn't renounce that God was leading them in the determination of those dates. And we continue to have evidence that those dates are correct, both in our history and in Millerite history.
So is
Yeah.
is the inclusion and application of Ezra 10 a mistake to say that the 20th day of the 9th month, as it occurred for Ezra, is not a good symbol for us? I mean, I see that it is.
Yeah, it's a good symbol for us. It has to be. One is it shows up in our line in other ways, which I'm not going to go into right now because that'd be too involved. But the 20th day of the 9th month is the prediction before midnight is 3 days before midnight. So we have this symbol of these 3 days, and we can see them showing up in the story of Ezra 7 to 10. 3 times we have 3 periods of 3 days. We also have 3 days in connection with Christ's ministry in 2 different ways, both symbolic as 3 years and also literal 3 days, the time that he's in the heart of the earth. And this connects us with the story of Jonah that you've done. So we can see that these are all connected. We can go back to the story of Joseph, and we have the 3 days of the butler and the baker, also a symbol of the prediction before midnight. So we have this symbol of 3 days, and we had to show up in our line in various ways as well. But
So
now we have this 20th day of the 9th month coming up in December 25th. And I think your suggestion that this refers to the time that we have to come into unity based upon the story itself, I think is sound. And I've actually made that argument, though not exactly in the same way, in my paper addressing, I can't remember the title of the paper, but it's addressing the story of Ezra. So you got a comment then?
Well, of course, we have 3 days in the situation with Jonah as well.
Yeah.
And it may be more than one 3-day period, because we don't really have a good way of determining exactly how long he was on the ship before he was thrown overboard.
No, and we don't even have, I mean, when the Bible says that he's 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a whale, I mean, it's an idiomatic expression. It doesn't mean that he has to be 3 days and 3 whole nights to the minute or to the hour in the belly of the whale. I mean, it could have been there what we would call 2 days, but in the Bible, it's 3 days and 3 nights.
Right, but I guess the issue that I'm also looking at is that if Ezra 10 is set aside as being time setting, then are we not seeing that these others are also setting aside the validity of 457 and the beginning of the 2300 days?
Well, yes. Now, see, the interesting thing about this, so when I had gone through the story of Ezra, and this would be back in 2015, and we started to realize that there was these chiasms. The first one that we recognized was the chiasm from the 3 days after the first day of the 5th month, when they arrive in Jerusalem and then bring the gold and silver to the temple. And then the 3 days before the 20th day of the 9th month, that the center of this was the 10th day of the 7th month, as a very profound evidence that the 2300 days was correct and that Adventism had missed out on the start of the 2300 days, a way to nail that down as being the 10th day of the 7th month in 457. But we also, in studying Ezra, we also found that there was the other period of 107 days that can be divided into 2 periods of 54 days, one a cardinal count and the other one ordinal count. And that tied us to the mirror from the 10th day of the 7th month, which symbolized as 107 days. And the 54 days would be the 5th day of the 4th month, the center date in Boston. So we tied Millerite history to 457 BC by this chronological structure that ends with the 20th day of the 9th month in the book of Ezra. And this is extremely profound. Now, many people accepted this. People like Larry Lesher accepted this. But when it came to the issue of July 18th and its failure, he actually went back and basically discounted the entire thing. That he said that this was not, not something that we could do, right? That when we connect dates and we count spans and times, that this is a deception. Of course, he is not explaining this. He's not explaining how do we explain that these structures exist in the story of Ezra, but he just discounted them, right? So this was part of their argument in their paper on December 6th. Now, I wrote a paper called 3 Days in Ezra and Nehemiah and their relation to the events from December 4th to 6th. And my argument is that those 3 days are December 4th to 6th in our history, in that connection with that document that they send out. Their what did they title it? Their what was the title of their paper that they put out on December 6th? Declaration? Was it a declaration?
It may have been.
I think that's the word they use. But I show that it's connected to Ezra and Nehemiah. So first you're going to see that there's these 3 days that are connected to that with the prediction before midnight, but also to its rejection. Now, can we argue about December 25th, 2021, that it's connected to 3 days? And if it was, what are those 3 days that it's connected to?
Well, we either wind up with a 3-day literal connection or we wind up with a 3-day figurative. And the premise that I would look to use would be that this would be a 3-day figurative connection.
which would be 2019, 2020, 2021.
Exactly.
So that's November 9th,
Right.
2019, December or July 18th, 2020, and December 25th, 2020.
So in looking at it, 2019 could be seen as the afternoon of the preparation day, 2020 as the Sabbath, 2021 as the first day of the week.
Yeah, we could look at it that way. I mean, there's lots. We can even, we can just look at the whole year 2019 of what happened. Because basically, 2019 also starts out with some other events. But anyway, whatever way you try to take those 3 days, you can definitely say that they have to end December 25th, 2021, from a prophetic point of view. And this is the thing that I still find fascinating when we go through what we're reading here. And we're gonna, and as I said, we're gonna look at this in more detail. We're not gonna just skip over this. We're looking at what he's saying. And now we're gonna have to dig into these documents and see if what he's saying is correct. Because he's just arguing something that we can see is false, but we have to establish that it's a complete misrepresentation of that history by picking and choosing a few statements here and there, and then creating this picture. He colors that full statement in early writings in a way that really, even in and of itself, doesn't support the new view of the daily, right? Even if you tried to take his arguments at face value, but he's going to still continue to twist it even further, because all the most that they can try to say, even if what they're saying is true, even if Ellen White was making statements that there was time setting in connection with by adding the word sacrifice to the daily, all they could do is say, well, Ellen White's statement there isn't explicitly supporting that the daily is paganism, but it would still be implying that the daily is paganism, because this time setting would be created by removing 508. And if we were united on the correct view of the daily, this wouldn't be just about the word, this would have to be connected with the date. So almost by making Ellen White say what they say she's saying, they make her actually say too much. That is, it still wouldn't support their view. But I'm arguing that that's not what she's saying even at all. So, and there's something deeper that we have to learn regarding this history. And especially,
I would like,
what's that?
I was just going to make a comment
Okay.
concerning December 25th.
Mhm.
But I was looking at the history of 508,
Mhm.
and normally with Clovis's baptism,
Yeah.
there's two dates given. There's one 496, and then
Yeah.
there's 508.
Yeah.
And the one at 496 was given by someone, I think it was like 80 years afterwards.
Yeah.
That there's some element where they think there's some propaganda purposes that they wanted Clovis to be baptized earlier.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
I
there's,
think, yeah. The evidence is that Clovis was baptized December 25th, 508, correct?
yes.
That's a
So-
very good argument. Yeah, so we can look into that. Can you dig up some of that for us for tomorrow?
Right, okay.
Yeah, because I was looking into that too, and I was quite intrigued by it. But because the arguments are pretty sound that it's actually 508. But what I didn't want to do is just say, well, because it fits so well, I'm going to accept it. I wanted to try to see what kind of implications that would make. As far as I can tell, it doesn't affect anything else. Right? It's not like they say the chronology is all wrong. It's just that they're saying that they placed it initially in the wrong year. Now,
Could you actually kneel down the taking away of the daily to be in that event, that baptism? Because he apparently his army as well got baptized. So a portion of it anyway.
well, that's the thing that I saw. Is I thought, well, that's definitely going to mark the taking of the way daily in 508, and it actually helps us because 596, his baptism being in 596 doesn't really serve any prophetic purpose.
496.
Yeah, 496 in it. Yeah, it doesn't serve any prophetic purpose, but it being in 508. But I almost thought it was too good to be true. So if you can kind of dig that up for us, I think that would be an important point to look at.
Okay.
And that definitely would relate to the daily being paganism. So thanks for that comment. So we're gonna spend this week, maybe even next week, really finishing off our study on the daily before we go back to notebook number 2. Right? I think that's where we go next, is notebook number 2. If I remember correctly. I think we're done notebook number 1. So this diversion into looking at the daily in detail has definitely been profitable, but we're not done by any stretch of the imagination of digging into these documents. And Stephen's comment about 508, the baptism of Clovis on December 25th, 508, I think is something that we have to look into, and we have to make a decision about it because it might be extremely significant. So let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this study time here this morning, and we ask that you can be with us throughout this day, guide and direct us in our personal study, and may your angels watch over us in our day-to-day business, and may we reflect your character to all that we come in contact with in every manner. Help those who are struggling, Lord, in various ways. Maybe even it's just the heat and the difficulties that we have in life, living in this world of sin. Help us, Lord, to have fellowship with you, that we can be in your kingdom. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.